Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me on today's episode of I Don't Care with me, Dr. Kevin Stevenson. As always, I appreciate you spending time with me and my interesting guests each and every week. So today's guest is no different, actually a little bit different than most of my guests. I'm talking with someone across the pond, as they say. Today's guest is Jeremy Lovelace. He's the founding director of HFX Technologies. And Jeremy is talking to us from merry old London. Jeremy, welcome to I Don't Care.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, Kevin.
It is great to have you. You know, I've had a few guests from the UK before and been blessed to have some folks from Israel and Germany. And so thank you for joining my international guest panel.
Excellent. Pleasure.
Jeremy and I were just talking about an event that he's going to be attending here pretty soon in Geneva, Switzerland. Jeremy, where are you going and why is that?
So I'm going to the World Hospital Congress, and the reason I'm going is because I believe it's going to be an excellent opportunity to stay current with the trends in the sector, and also to network with international leaders in the space. And I must say, I was sort of prompted to participate by some of my contacts at the American College of Healthcare Executives, who suggested it would be a good place to go and just meet people.
That sounds fascinating. Earlier this year, my family and I went to Italy. And I actually did a couple of mini tours of hospitals near Venice and in Tuscany. And it's just really interesting to see how other countries deliver healthcare. Yeah. You know, I was talking with someone earlier this week. I was at a seminar, and she's originally from Russia. Okay. And so we had a really interesting conversation on that. So, you know, maybe someday, Jeremy, I'll join you at a World Hospital meeting because to me, it's just fascinating.
Yeah,
you know, everybody does things a little bit differently, and I think it's great to broaden our horizons. And you also mentioned that you're going to indulge in one of your pastimes while you're there as well. Talk to my audience about that.
Yeah, so there was a little sweetener, because obviously when it comes to investing in conferences, you know, you always have to do a sort of ROI scratch pad calculation. But I think something that really tipped the balance into this being a no-brainer was the fact that the CEO of the association that organizes the conference, the International Hospital Federation, I believe, IHF, is clearly a cycling fan and has organized a day trip to the UCI World Cycling Headquarters in Geneva. And there's going to be a track day. And so I get to indulge one of my hobbies while simultaneously having what I hope to be a really targeted networking opportunity. So I'm really looking forward to that.
That's the prime example of some work-life balance there. That's
exactly awesome. Killing two birds with one stone.
That's right. So Jeremy, tell my audience a little bit about HFX Technologies and how we got connected, because I really enjoyed what you and your folks are doing, particularly in the healthcare space.
Yeah. Okay. So HFX Technologies, the genesis of HFX Technologies was really seeing how management consulting had developed on the back of a proliferation of decision-making software, strategic decision-making software tools. So, you know, back in the day, you know, consulting firms would be called in to help companies make complex decisions and build financial models and come out with a specific answer to a specific question in terms of typically resource allocation. As I started to grow the sort of footprint of HFX Technologies, I saw that there was a specific opportunity in the simulation-based training space or simulation-based education space. So these are effectively financially tools that are grounded in financial models or dynamic financial models that are designed to train decision makers to think more strategically, develop business acumen, if you like, in business. As I went deeper and deeper into that specific part of the area, so the decision science being the general area, but training decision makers in how to be more effective decision makers became a key interest. And I partnered with a design team that have been building this type of simulation for many years in Brazil. A couple of years after we started working together, they decided to build a simulation based on the experiences of one of the top hospitals in Latin America. I believe you're familiar with it. It's the Albert Einstein Hospital. And they did a fantastic job. So the design team is bringing like decades of experience of building these simulations that are applied both in the corporate space on leadership development programs, but also on MBA programs. That would be a typical use case. And they did a fantastic job with this particular simulation, which was based not only on the experiences of the Einstein Hospital in Brazil, but also pulling data from the Association of Private Hospitals in Brazil as well. So the sim is very robust and based around that sort of Brazilian context. One of the big questions I had when we developed it was how applicable would it be overseas? And I think that's what's been really exciting, is seeing how easy it has been to adopt by teachers and organizations in different areas, from Europe to the US, Middle East, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And that was one of my questions too. It's because of our previous conversation. Healthcare is delivered a little bit differently, everywhere, including within the United States. And so I was wondering, your thoughts on utilizing a Brazilian hospital model and how that would translate to the States. If it sounds like it does.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the first questions I had as a Brit was, I wonder if this would ever work in the National Health Service, in a public sector environment. And that has been answered in a number of different ways. So primarily, I do a lot of work with one of the big universities in the UK, University College London, that has a global business school for health. And we work with them on 3 of their programs. They have a Master of Science and an MBA and an Executive MBA. And participants who've been going through the simulation on those programs, a very large percentage of them will be working with the NHS. And I've heard directly from the horse's mouth students going, that was absolutely fantastic. That applies so much to the environment I'm in. And we've definitely started to have conversations with individual NHS hospitals about the possibility of applying the simulation in that context. And then continuing on that sort of public sector thread, we've also been delivering the simulation into Brazilian public hospitals as well. So the sim's been able to map from an elite premier private hospittal to public hospitals in Brazil. And then more broadly, we've been seeing the sim applied in a number of different contexts or geographic contexts in both Europe and also the US. And of course, in the US, every different state will have its own particular quirks. And the simulation, I think there are 2 ways that the simulation makes itself usable in these different contexts. The first is that there's a lot of customization that we can do quite easily in the simulation regarding, teams have a lot of authority over what goals they want to set for their hospital. And additionally, instructors can adapt the news items and crises and interventions that come with the simulation. But also, I think a key thing is because a simulation like this, the chief goal is making people better decision makers, improving their acumen, improving their instincts. We're not designing the simulation to create a very specific answer to a very specific question. So where there are differences in the way the simulation models the space and the space that the participants find themselves in, those differences are small enough to not prevent the lessons being valuable, if that makes sense.
Well, and that was something I wanted to know too, is because of the fluidity of healthcare. I mean, it's ever changing every day, and sometimes hour by hour.
Yeah.
How is the model updated? But I think you answered that question. It sounds like it's just a very dynamic model that can be customized based upon geography or whatever. And something else that kind of jumped out at me too, much like in Brazil and certainly elsewhere, the United States, our healthcare system is, I mean, divided is probably an interesting term, but I'll just use it. Divided into not for profit and for profit, and
Yeah.
so being able to utilize different goal sets, because for profit healthcare, it's shareholder maximization and optimization, and so, and then on the not for profit side, certainly excess revenue over expense is important for capital investment. However, you're looking so much more closely at quality metrics and community metrics and population health and all of that.
Yeah.
Sounds like your models work. Will certainly integrate all of those, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one of the key things that distinguishes the game, I won't go into too much detail, but there are a number of different performance metrics against which the participating teams can allocate a fixed number of weighting points. So, I won't detail all of them, but say, for example, you might have share price as a performance metric. You might have profitability, you might have revenue as performance metrics. If your vision for your hospital is that you're a not-for-profit, well, share price, you don't want to be sending any of those weighting points to that particular metric. There are a number of others. I don't want to give away too much of the secret sauce, but
sure, of course,
suffice to say, that has helped to get buy-in from educators across the world. Them seeing the ability of the teams to craft their own strategy and reflect more, to a greater or lesser degree of accuracy, the realities of different types of hospitals. And then,
sure.
And then the other big thing is at the back end, we can also manipulate, the growth environment you find yourself in, GDP growth, inflation rates, and then a number of different interventions that you may or may not wish to incorporate into the experience, which make it very, very dynamic and fun.
Yeah, I would think so. Being able to bring in local demographic information and even drilling down so far as to what would happen if you're in a 3 cardiovascular surgeon hospital and one of them leaves suddenly. Because those are real world decisions that we've all had to face in our careers. I've been really fortunate to have worked with a number of U.S. university programs, whether it be just strictly MBA or MBA in healthcare or MHA programs, and they're putting out wonderful candidates for health systems and other healthcare related entities. But I think what your simulation brings is that real world experience. Case in point, last week, I went to the Baylor University case competition for healthcare management, and they had teams from universities across the country. Great young and mid-careerist folks who have gone back, and being able to watch them throughout that process. But what it is, it's a very microscopic, very focused case, and the output, is frankly subjective based upon that judge's opinion. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're putting together is something there that's very metric driven, and that there is a somewhat more clear winner and loser in a competition of that regard using your software. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the system automatically scores the teams against those different metrics on a round by round basis, in accordance with the simulated numbers that their hospital has generated, and that's all a function of how intelligently are they playing in an environment of uncertainty. Because of course, if you increase your investments in quality, all things equal, there will be increased demand for your hospital services, but not if you've increased your spend less than everyone else. So there's that uncertainty that's very powerful. So it's metric driven. It's very much a quantitative challenge. It's quantifiable in terms of the results. But I think the most interesting thing about a simulation exercise like this is the human skills that it demands for the teams that are participating, because it's quite stressful. There's a lot of information to process and decide what's important or not. And then you've got to go about making decisions in this environment of uncertainty. And for me, I think that's probably the more I've been involved in teaching these simulations, the more I see that as perhaps being the most powerful outcome of these experiences.
I would agree with that, because as I said, our schools are putting out, fantastic candidates, but oftentimes they don't have that. Yeah, they're very focused on book learning, and and they forget that healthcare is a business about people, and I have always laughed. I was involved in public education on a school board side, so I said the two most irrational industries in the United States, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the UK, are education and healthcare, because they're very emotional driven. People, if you've got a child in a school, you want to make sure that you have the very best for them. And sometimes it's at you really don't care about what other people's kids are dealing with. It's all about your kid. Okay. Same thing in healthcare. I mean, grandma is not doing well. She's in the hospital. You want everybody in that hospital focused on grandma's health care. But in the same vein, people make very irrational decisions, and I know the metric that the vast majority of healthcare dollars are spent in the last 6 months of someone's life. And so, being able to be a little bit more rational about those end of life decisions, not only is more humane to the patient oftentimes, but it certainly is fiscally more responsible.
Yeah.
But in the environment that we're in as healthcare administrators, we still have to deal with that emotion. So tell me a little bit, how can you integrate that into a simulation?
Before I give you my answer, I'm just going to back out a little bit and talk about how I see there being different types of training simulations. Mm-hmm. So this simulation that we have here, I would call is a classic strategic management simulation that's putting the participants in the shoes of one of a number of competing hospitals, and it's driven by a dynamic financial modeling engine, and it's really replicating that uncertainty of strategic business decision making. At the other end of the sort of scale or the complexity of simulation design, well, these are complex in their own ways, but I'd say maybe role-playing simulations that are maybe more suited to the development of skills for specific roles. And so we've also got a number of simulations that perhaps cater to that, including simulations to help with difficult conversations, managing a team for the first time, all of that type of thing. So navigating difficult conversations with patients, that's something that we could easily create a simulation for example. Mm-hmm. So there is that animal of simulation out there. And I think that type of simulation is more driven by AI generated conversations. So you can practice these conversations, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, back to this former type of simulation, the sort of strategic management sim. The navigating those trade-offs, the way we would be doing that would be at the most strategic level of the hospital. So it might be, say, for example, a common question will be a team of students might be, well, we're interested in managing a small rural community hospital. A small rural community hospital. That's a hospital it's not going to be particularly well capitalized. It's going to struggle to capture like premium or high complexity services. And it might just be small. There are some serious constraints around that. So they need to think, well, what metrics can they be targeting? And then what we do, we work with professors to suggest how they can use the platform to enable teams to pursue that type of strategy, which might be more focused on, providing like this safety net for communities that don't have easy access to healthcare. Because in the simulation, we can reflect a loan, a government loan. The instructor can simply loan a company money in order to compensate for that. So I guess my answer to your question there is, for that type of complex strategic financial simulation, those trade-offs we navigate with intelligently using the interventions.
Very good. Very good. So, all right. So the simulation is used in something akin to a case competition, and you have a clear winner. You designate first, second, and third place. Is there any sort of feedback following these competitions from you, or would it be from the professor, or what, regarding, hey, our team was scored X on this area, Y on this area, and why the differentiation between the teams? Because that's something that I think, particularly the students that I work with, they're always asking for constant feedback, and I would give them specific tasks to do, and then evaluate that task. They always wanted that feedback. So is that basically back on the professor or the organization, or is that something that's integrated into your model?
Yeah, it's a great question. Great question. Well, I think the first thing is integral to any exercise like this is reflective learning. Mm-hmm. So we're always encouraging the students to do a post-mortem on not just at the end of the simulation, but on a round by round basis as the simulation progresses along simulated quarters of hospital operations. The students in their team should be thinking, well, what happened? Conduct a difference analysis. What were our forecast numbers? Where are they different? And let's have a think, why were they different? How do we want to adapt our decisions in the next decision-making cycle in order to potentially do better? So you should never lighten that load on the students. They should be encouraged and graded for it as well. So in a university context, we often see a lot of faculty will actually not grade the performance in the simulation at all. Assuming the students are very motivated, you can leave all the grading to the reflective assignments, because what you're encouraging is that the students will think about, well, what have we learned? What did we do wrong? And what would we do differently next time? And sometimes the best students aren't necessarily those that did best in the simulation. They're those that really applied themselves to thinking, well, what went well and what went poorly? Now, back to how we can help. So what the simulation engine does, during the simulation itself, the professor and us, we always have access to a cohort-wide view of team performance. Across all the different financials, we're following line graphs, so we can see like wonky decision making. If someone's suddenly gone into, $10 million of an overdraft facility or revolving credit, they haven't planned their finances very well, and you can jump on that if you want to. You might prefer not to jump on it. Let them find out themselves or figure that out themselves. It depends on the type of cohort. If it's an undergraduate cohort, they're going to need more hand-holding probably. But for an MBA, for a capstone or an MHA capstone, think about it. You should know enough to be able to figure out what's going on. At the end of the simulation, once the game has ended and the results are released, those relative performance graphs are all made available to the students to assist them in their reflective learning, so they can really conduct that post-mortem theoretically themselves.
That's fascinating. See, and that's exactly what I was thinking. The best utilization for this would be in a university setting, would be at that capstone project. And I would have greatly enjoyed something like this at the end of my graduate program, because it takes the book learning and it operationalizes that, and it allows you to see, what each individual decision, how it impacts the entity as a whole. And that's something I think a lot of particularly new graduates, but even seasoned executives, sometimes they get so lost in the minutia that they don't recognize, how it's going to affect, something else in the organization or in the future. And so, uh, again, when we first started talking about this a few weeks ago, I was just fascinated by it. So Jeremy, again, your target market, would obviously be universities, but what about those large forward-thinking organizations that are doing constant org development? You know, can it be adaptable? Say, while we've been talking a lot about hospitals and health systems, is this adaptable in other healthcare environments?
My sense is, and the view I'd say, if you speak to simulation developers who are very focused on sort of business engineering, they see that the lessons derived from participating in one simulation of this nature can be applied to any industry environment. So, for example, if you're doing a generic MBA and you went through our hospital management simulation, you'd be learning lessons about the interdependence of different decisions in all industries. It would be applicable. However, from a sort of marketing perspective, generally the decision makers would prefer to work with people who have a simulation that is specific to the type of organization that they're responsible for. So yeah, my answer is sort of hedged. I would like to say yes, but in practice, people like to see sims that are specific to their exact context.
Something else I was thinking about too. I've been a part of a lot of chambers of commerces across the United States. I don't know about the UK. Have programs called Leadership X, like Leadership Waco or whatever. And I've been involved in 3 of those programs throughout my career. And it's always wonderful because you learn a lot about that community, but there are specific days, like there's always a healthcare day. So I could even see this on an incredibly small scale, being used in the community, because there's always so much confusion in and around, how does healthcare work? How do hospitals work? And so I could see something like this, drill down into like maybe a 3 to 4 hour simulation for local business leaders, just to give them a feel about how decision making is really different in healthcare. What do you think?
Yeah, well, we've demonstrated the ability to deliver on that sort of time scale through we've done it in academia, and we've also done that for pilots at corporate as well. So obviously before corporates buy in, they like to have a decent taster. Sure. And a simulation of this complexity defies a simple 1 hour demo. You've got to put people in it and let them go through a few simulated practice rounds. So I reckon over 4 we've delivered pilots of 4 hours, and we've delivered on intensive financial management and accounting classes at MBA level, 4 hour classes, using 3, 4, 5 rounds of the simulation. And people aren't necessarily going to come out with as profound an experience as they would over a 2 to 3 day workshop. But absolutely, as a taster, it's fantastic.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that, how that would have enriched healthcare day even more so for me in each of those organizations. So, Jeremy, we're coming up against time. Any final words from you?
I just something came up when you were talking about how you'd like to have done it on the capstone, and how much it brings things to life. I remember when I did my MBA, it was the first time I'd come across a simulation. I found my MBA relatively academically doable. I could get through the exams and the paper writing, no problem. The simulation was like shining a bright light into all my decision-making inadequacies. And it was really difficult. And I came out of the MBA sort of humbled by it, and it was the best thing that happened to me. Otherwise, I'd have been one of those annoying MBAs who think they know everything but don't know anything. And the truth is, faculty, when we do faculty training, most faculty go through that exact experience. It is a very humbling thing to go through, but therein lies its power.
Absolutely. Well, Jeremy Lovelace, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed it. Anything that can help advance the knowledge and the decision making particularly in the healthcare industry, but in any industry, is something that we should all really pay attention to and try to strive for. So thanks so much. So folks, Jeremy Lovelace, founding director of HFX Technologies. If you have any questions or if you'd like some more information on this, Jeremy, what's the website where people can go to?
Yes, it's hfxtraining.com. So that's specifically the site that's dedicated to simulation. So hfxtraining.com.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeremy. Thank you, everybody, for joining me today on our episode of I Don't Care with me, Dr. Kevin Stevenson. We'll see you again next week. Take care.